Welcome back. The Albanese government has received a boost in the polls after its first 90 days in office. According to this Resolve poll, Labor's primary vote is at 42%. That's 11 points up from its electorate victory in May. The coalition slumped to 28%, down 6 points. The Greens 12%. One Nation at 5% and the United Australia Party at 2%. Anthony Albanese holds a commanding lead over opposition leader Peter Dutton as the preferred Prime Minister. 55% of voters prefer Mr Albanese compared to just 17% for Mr Dutton. 28% are undecided on the issue. Joining me live now is former Labor advisor at Council House now, Tom Cameron. Tom, great to see you. First of all, is this just a standard honeymoon period you're seeing for a new government here?
Morning, Laura. Look, I mean, it probably is a pretty big boost to the government's sort of feelings at the moment about how they're going. But let's be honest, the sort of horse race element of the polling we've seen this morning from Resolve, and that's really, the primary vote and the 2PP, that's sort of a bit obscure in the sense that it's in the context of there's not an election about to occur, and so to some extent you can set that to one side. I think what's really interesting, though, about it is where the way that the popularity or the support for the government that's manifest in that poll is reflected in the issues polling as well, where we've basically seen a switch from pre-election on who's better on the economy, where the coalition had a 10-point lead. You now see the government, Labor, have about a 10-point lead on that front. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, it is just one poll, but it's certainly interesting that we've seen that switch so quickly. The Morrison issue is certainly not helping the opposition at the moment, but does this entire issue again, just take the whole system? People lose faith in institutions. And whilst all the political heat is on the now opposition at the moment, Tom, it does show that this new government needs to, I guess, bring up the standing of these institutions, and there's some change perhaps that needs to be made around the edges.
Yeah, I think where the rubber really hits the road from the employment summit, which is only a few weeks away and onwards, where it's about what's the government actually doing to manage the economy or to engage in a meaningful sense on these economic management kind of concerns that the electorate are currently saying we think we've got a bit of faith, paying forward a bit of faith in the new government to do the right thing. What that does, though, of course, Laura, is it creates an expectation management risk for the government whereby if they don't follow through and are seen to deliver in the medium term, the electorate may turn on them, having sort of put a bit of faith in them that they want to see those changes or those sort of, strong reform sort of movements from the government in relation to inflation's a big one. I mean, we saw another poll from Essential, I think it was, which saw about 82%, I think it might have worked out to be, people that saying they were either very concerned or concerned about inflation, and that naturally translates into the cost of living politics that we've seen dominate for quite a few months now. So unless the government do really get stuck into some work on that front, on that economic management front, and Jim Chalmers is clearly doing a lot of communications and really kind of positioning the government before his October budget, but unless they see that through, I think heading into the new year, it may go from something that's really pretty pleasing for them to perhaps some less, more complex politics in the medium term.
Yeah, managing expectations is going to be really tough for the government going into the economic environment that we all can see coming. Inflation perhaps has peaked, perhaps hasn't, who knows, but we know that everything is still pretty expensive at the moment. Interest rates are going to keep on going up. For an Albanese Labor government, is that still the biggest risk for them in this first term, that it's really events outside of their control that they can't reverse that might see those poll numbers come down pretty quickly?
Well, the wisest answer to that question is probably we'll see. But I think what you unpacked there a bit for viewers, Laura, is that there's two sides to the cost of living crisis or frustration, and that is stagnant wages, which has very much been a focus of Treasurer Chalmers and the PM and the government sort of messaging going into the election and out of it. But the other side of it, of course, is relating to the actual what's going on in the real economy in terms of costs. So we haven't really heard much from Labor when it comes to, say, competition policy or what they want to do on the consumer front. Interestingly, very niche, but the Treasury announced a bit of a sort of reform process or a review process relating to cryptocurrencies and how that relates to consumers, and perhaps there needing to be a more regulatory sort of front-footing the fact that they need to catch up with where the market's gone on cryptocurrencies. It's very niche, but it's just an example of if they're sort of looking at the consumer side from a cost perspective and not just the worker side from a wages perspective, perhaps we'll see the electorate sort of willing to say, look, they're doing something here, but we need to have a little patience. But at the same time, the expectation management is somewhat diabolical.
Yeah, absolutely.